So with that, that brings our partner showcase to a close. Huge thanks to all the presenters for the amazing sessions. I'm going to bring Steph back on now to introduce our final keynote speaker. Hey, Steph. Oh, you're on mute. I got to say it. I've been waiting all day.
Oh man, that is a rookie move. Up next, we're excited to shine a light on one of the most dynamic and mission-driven corners of the broadband industry, and that's the world of wireless ISPs. So at Sonar, we now have a vital WISPs. We know how vital WISPs are, and closing that digital divide. So especially in rural and hard to reach communities. These providers are resilient, they're innovative, and often the first to connect to the unconnected. And no organization or advocates more powerfully than for this community than the WISPs broadband without boundaries. So I'm honored to introduce a leader who embodies that mission, Zaided Zumwalt. Sorry. Wow, I'm batting 1,000 here. David Zumwalt. I'm so sorry, David. He's the president and CEO of WISPA. And David brings an extraordinary range of experience across the private sector, and across academia. From his time leading Broadband VI, sorry about that, you guys, where he helped secure $84.5 million in FCC funding and then oversaw a successful acquisition. To his work growing the USVI's research and technology park. So David is consistently focused on scaling broadband access, driving innovation, and shaping public policy. So also earlier in his career, he founded CNET Inc., a global RF engineering and OSS software company. He's also helped, leadership and held leadership and board roles across venture-backed startups and public and private initiatives. Sorry, guys, I'm losing my voice today, so struggling here a little bit. So at WISPA, David champions the entrepreneurs who are building broadband networks from the ground up. He's here today to share insights into the policy landscapes, the innovations coming from the WISP community, and what the future holds for the wireless first providers. So please join me in welcoming a true advocate for broadband without boundaries, David Zumwalt.
Thank you very much, Steph. Appreciate it. We'll go ahead and get into the presentation. Next slide, please. I want to tell you one, yes, there we go. WISPA started actually in around 2000, so it's almost 25 years old, but it was formally chartered in 2004. And it really was a founder of this shared ecosystem that we're in right now. This was at a time when competitive providers of internet service were emerging out of traditional telecom and other network services. And there was a realization at that time that in order to be able to compete, not only with larger operators, but to compete for what was needed for resources in developing areas of our country, that there needed to be an industry voice to be able to do this. So the hometown ISPs came together and formed WISPA as a big tent for network operators, the manufacturers that support them, the distributors, and the professional services firms, the same ecosystem that we're dealing with now that's evolved over time. And it was imperative that WISPA have a strong voice for advocacy for operators who are working in this space, because otherwise the FCC would be inclined to make decisions that were not necessarily aligned with the interests or the needs of the industry. And it wasn't just regulatory policy, but it was also congressional. It was basically lawmaker policy work as well. Even in those days, members deployed all available technologies. And so from the beginning, even though we have wireless in our name, and that's a big part of what we do, WISPA and WISPA's members have deployed the right tool for the right job to be able to meet the needs of their communities. So what does WISPA do? We drive regulatory policy engagement, development of industry standards, and federal as well as state advocacy for our industry, and help our members scale. Next slide, please. If I go back in time, I'll date myself a bit, but there was at the beginning of competitive telecom, when it was only AT&T and other companies were emerging, there was a railroad company, Southern Pacific particular, that looked at the right-of-ways that the railroad tracks provided, and they saw in front of them the possibility of a nationwide backbone network for long distance microwave communications. And that effort ultimately led to them creating Southern Pacific Communications Corporation, which you would now know as Sprint or T-Mobile. So the evolution that occurs over a period of time comes from great ideas to create competitive footprints using resources that you have in place. It all starts with an entrepreneurial idea, even if it starts from a larger company perspective. And I would imagine many of the operators who are in attendance here can identify with whatever that was that got you started, whatever the need was in your community. But it was imperative that you be able to provide a service that your communities could use, one that would be reliable and one that would scale over time. So we advocate for all of those operators. And we find that, especially in rural America, many of them use wireless connectivity somewhere within the network. We're not just an advocate for these operators, we're advocating for the communities they serve too, because they each have special needs. They each have unique requirements, topologies, problems that they're trying to solve. And these communities need voice, and we help bring that to bear as well. So we've become, over 20 plus years, a focused, reliable, and trusted advisor in federal and now in state projects and priorities. And so you'll find us haunting the halls of the FCC, NTIA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Capitol Hill, the presidential administration, as well as state and policy initiatives. Next slide, please. So who is WISPA really? When you think about WISPA, you may be thinking about one entity, but there are three in one. The Wireless Internet Service Providers Association is the lobbying organization. It's a 501c6. And it's a membership association. It exists to promote the development, advancement, and unification of our industry. Part and parcel to that, we have a 501c3, a foundation that also serves as an educational institute. And it's not a member association. It's open to anyone to participate. And this is where we focus on things like education, best practice, some future solutions. Get into that a little bit more in a minute. But it's all about thought leadership, broadband service innovations, anything that's going to advance the state of the art of our industry and the communities they serve. And then finally, as a force multiplier and as a voice multiplier for our members, we have WISPA PAC, which is a connected political action committee that is part of WISPA, and it supports candidates and issues that are aligned with the priorities of WISPA. It's bipartisan, and so we work both sides of the aisle, and WISPA PAC has been very instrumental in helping us amplify our voices. Next slide, please. If I were to summarize the four principal priorities that we are pursuing now at WISPA, we refer to them as four pillars. The first is balance. When it comes to spectrum policy, if we're just talking about wireless for a minute, we want to make sure that a balanced spectrum approach is taken that will allow small and rural providers to have a fair shot at accessing airwaves. Got an example I'll talk about in a minute, but if you're following along, you know that there's a lot happening on Capitol Hill right now in reconciliation. There's a lot of talk, kind of an arm wrestle that's going on between large mobile carriers and smaller carriers that are operating in spectrum bands that have been licensed, but may be subject to some political footballs here of late. And so, one of our arguments is whatever we do with spectrum, it has to involve and include small and rural providers. They need to have a fair shot. The second pillar is need. To the extent that government support is going to be warranted, for example, the BEAD program or others that preceded it, we think it's really important that funding be targeted to the truly unserved communities, not to come in and create layers of service on top of layers of service for served communities, but to actually go and close the digital divide. And this is an area where our members have considerable expertise. They're working in those areas already. And we all want to imagine a day in the not too distant future where we can finally get connectivity to everyone that wants connections, because that opens up a brand new world of things that we can talk about, how are we going to continue to build value and add value through the services that we provide to the folks that we've connected, whether residential, commercial, whatever. The third pillar has to do with competition. We want to make sure that regulatory burdens don't overwhelm what small businesses need to be competitive and remain competitive. So you'll find us always on the side of reducing regulatory burdens that come up from time to time. And finally, I'm sure this will resonate as well. It has to do with accessibility, um, to have access to really fair and access to infrastructure for broadband deployments, whether you're looking at pole attachment rights, you're looking at airwaves, you're looking at permitting. Uh, this is quite a fabric right now. It's somewhat of hodgepodge between federal, state, local interests. But ultimately, if we're going to connect America, then we need to make sure that we can deploy infrastructure in a reasonable way. So accessibility for our members and for our community is important. Next slide, please. Now, I won't go too deeply into this, but for those of you who haven't spent much time in the advocacy world, I just want to talk a little bit about what we often do behind the scenes. So as a trade association, you might know us well for our shows, WISPA America, WISPA Palooza, the regional events we do, the state events. You may know something from committees that we provide that serve to sort of guide our thought process as we think about how we're going to advocate. But what really is happening is an ongoing engagement in all of these different areas that you see on the screen, whether it's Congress, the White House, the FCC, NTIA, other areas of commerce, Department of Agriculture, rural utilities, other federal agencies, all the way down to state elected officials, agencies, and now broadband offices. We have a pretty good, I'd say pretty broad, extensive team that we can deploy in each of these areas. And we also have a state coordinator network within our membership that helps keep us apprised of what's happening at a state level, because every state is different. And obviously every schedule is different in terms of cadences for programs and build outs. So what you'll find us doing is deploying our resources where we need to go, when we need to go, but it's always in support of the hometown ISP. Next slide, please. To get a seat at the table, if I just pick on the FCC here for a minute, the process, it does not start with just showing up on the day that a controversy has emerged. What you really have to do is get in and build and maintain relationships at the staff level, certainly at the commission level. You have to follow the dockets closely. You have to build collaborative coalitions wherever you can. You really have to be relational, not transactional, in the way that you approach the work that you do, because in many cases, we can be adverse to, for example, other associations in some cases and be tightly aligned with them in others. So these relationships are critically important to both identify where our needs are going to align with others and where we have opportunities to perhaps get in front of issues that are emerging. So in some cases, WISPA actually initiates the proceeding. Recent examples have to do with work we did in the C-band and with 10 gigahertz, which remains pending. If there's a rulemaking involved, we're in those offices early because we want to make sure that the needs of our communities and our operators are known, and that helps shape the narrative. Both internally within our membership, we also work on member education and involvement. We know that our operator members are busy. They're running their businesses. They don't necessarily have time to focus on things that need to happen from an advocacy perspective. But we're always providing opportunities for them to engage so that they're also building the relationships that they need as their businesses continue to scale. And then finally, the external process also involves cultivating, developing, and then feeding an outreach strategy that includes the trade press and other media. Next slide, please. Oh, kind of hitting on what I've already touched on. To grow influence and advocacy, it's got to be more than just filings or meetings, whether it's in Congress or state broadband offices. It really has to be, there has to be involvement in other things too. For example, advisory committees between NTI, FCC, other members of the communities of interest, DoD being one of them, industry stakeholder groups. WISPA has been very involved in industry standards bodies, and that's been sort of a secret weapon for our industry because we've had the opportunity to not only work with, but in many cases lead the discussions on how emerging standards for communications technologies are going to be implemented and technology that gets built and that gets used and ultimately scales within our industry. So in addition to doing the blocking and tackling and the hard work in these areas, we also get some really good early takes on what other areas of our industry are doing. We call it great intelligence in the sense that we know what mobile is going to be doing or asking for next. And that helps us identify ways that we can play defense in areas where the interests of other parties may not be aligned or may in fact, conflict with things that our members want to do. Next slide, please. Once you've got a seat at the table, there's the old joke that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Once you have a seat at the table, you want to keep it going. And so that's where our teams work internally to develop long-term strategies and tactics to be able to support our community. I think next one is really important. We try very, very hard to make sure that the statements that we make are credible, not only now, but later, because we know that even with turnover in Washington, D.C., staffers and members of Congress will remember something that you said a year ago. And so if we're saying something today about a technology or about a growth of the industry or about some issue that's important to us that is proven to be false later, then the overhang that we committed this year will work against us next year on something that we need that's vitally important. So credibility is something that we work very hard not only to sustain or create in new relationships, but to sustain it over time. We want to make sure that WISPA's statements on behalf of the industry are seen as credible now and well into the future. Obviously, blocking and tackling, follow-up, and responsiveness. These are things that you already all know about in your business. Maintaining communication, networking. These are the things that you would expect your own teams to do, and you'd certainly expect us to do. Finally, though, I would say that we have to acknowledge what's achievable. We don't have the industry strength to do necessarily what big mobile operators can do. The WISP community supports something like 9 million active subscribers around the country today in all 50 states, pretty much in all territories. We are deploying all technologies, including fiber, in the digital divide to an extent that we probably have more of it deployed among our members than anyone else does at this point in time. And I say that not to brag, but instead to say, our industry is robust. It's doing the sorts of things that you would expect reasonable operators to be doing in these communities, but we don't have 24/7 by 365 blanketing of Capitol Hill with lobbyists who've been paid for example, by AT&T. So it's important to know that, we pick our battles carefully, that we get in front of them early, but also acknowledge what's achievable because we want to set and keep expectations aligned. Next slide, please. Talked earlier about some of the front burner issues. If I were to have presented this to you next week at this time, all of what I'm going to say here may be different. So this is probably the one slide on this presentation that is not it's not timeless, but I'm going to touch on them anyway to give you an idea of some of the things we've been up to. CBRS is a spectrum that's basically in the 3 gigahertz band. It is a shared spectrum band that has priority use by the Department of Defense. It has some license called priority access license, a PAL use across the country, and it also has general use that is the lowest priority for the band, but kind of follows on the heels of what was done years ago in the 3.65 nationwide licensing that was done kind of prior to 2015. So there's 150 megahertz of spectrum that's there. It's working very well. There are over 400,000 endpoints that have been deployed. That number is growing exponentially. However, over the last couple of weeks, with the president's budget proposal, they realized that from a reconciliation perspective, they're going to have to raise something like $880 billion to balance that. And they came at this thinking that perhaps through a renewed auction authority for the FCC, that they could identify 80 to 100 billion of that 880 billion that they need by looking at select bands. And so AT&T went running in and saying, well, let's just redeploy CBRS entirely, nuke the band, and we'll figure out what to do with all the people who are in there. So for the last couple of weeks, we've been very busy. We certainly support the notion of a spectrum pipeline that can provide opportunities for everyone to be involved. And I'm certainly not about to predict that this is all going to go our way, but we like where it stands today because we've been able to convince Congress and the others who are paying attention to this that the cost of moving the services that are already there would outweigh any revenue benefit to repositioning CBRS today. So I think in this one, at least the leaning is, it looks like we may have um, um, flanked AT&T, at least for now. But I think the way that this is going to be handled is that Congress is going to instead just provide authority for the FCC to look across a broad range of spectrum bands to identify opportunities to raise the money that the Congress needs. So it's just going to move the battle from Congress perhaps back to the FCC. But because of the work we've done with the FCC before, we feel good about knowing the process and knowing about how we can move forward to advocate for our members. So stay tuned on that. It has been a very dynamic last couple of weeks. I had hair before I started this, and you can tell by looking at my headset that I'm throwing a glare right now. So it's been a busy couple of weeks. We also work on regulatory overreach and burden. The previous administration, it seemed like, was constantly ratcheting up expectations, including looking at disparate impact in broadband services. In this particular case, or the cases that were coming, we ended up engaging in 3 expensive appellate actions. These were actions that were taken by a consortia, a different consortia in each case, of organizations that were pushing back. Some of those cases have gone to the Supreme Court. We've won one of them. The other 2 certainly look good. But if you're interested in more of that, I can help you understand the background. But the point here is that when we see overreach, we don't just chat about it. We actually get involved and push back, sometimes to the extent of litigating it. Everyone, I'm sure, on this call is curious about what's going to be happening with BEAD. We know that the new administration is looking at BEAD through a fresh lens, but I don't expect to see a reboot of BEAD. Just want to go on record with you as saying that. But what we are doing is we're working with NTIA on a couple of issues that have been brought to our attention by our members. The second I'll get to first. We've been able to identify some clearly documented irregularities in the state challenge process in a handful of states that are going to be problematic later. And so we're asking NTIA to take a close look at that. And that's the sort of thing that we would do for our members or our industry anyway. The other is a concept I call build through. If you're looking at the serviceable location maps right now, you know that there are very few, if any, areas of unserved locations that are in tidy clusters of, oh, look, there are 500 unserved locations over there standing by themselves. Nobody even noticed them before. Typically, what happens with an unserved location is you have they're interspersed among other served locations. And so while the NTIA has made it clear that they are opposed having BEAD funds used to overbuild networks that are otherwise qualifying for the broadband standards that they have in place, the reality is when you build a network, because I've done this, you want to build through to reach new customers. And so in many cases, we think that the build out of BEAD is likely to go through areas that are served, and it's sort of a backhanded way of getting overbuilding to occur. And so we're focusing NTI on that to identify it as to the extent that we can to try to avoid it. If it's not avoidable, then to find ways to be able to work through that so that we don't end up with a BEAD program that in retrospect looks like it missed the mark entirely and did things that NTIA did not want it to do. Happy to talk about that as well, but that's another example of the kind of advocacy we do. So we want to be all about finding a way to say yes. We want to move forward within that pillar concept I was talking about before. If we're really going to be using federal funds to do something through subsidies, we want to make sure it's truly serving the unserved. And so this is all consistent with messaging that I mentioned before. And then longer term, I touched on this a little bit too. We want to start addressing the big questions. I think instead of 10 years from now, we're kind of within the next 3-year horizon potentially of being able to serve everyone who wants to be served. And while we're all busy growing our businesses and creating connections to places that don't have it before, creating better connections, whatever your business model is, what are you going to be doing once all locations are served? So you have the option of just becoming a better competitor, perhaps, or looking for ways to provide, services that you're not currently providing to your customers. And I think that that's where an ecosystem such as the one Sonar is built here is so important to be able to do this. You can leverage the skill sets of people who are in the ecosystem. You can see what others are doing, and perhaps you have ideas on how you're going to make broadband better, not just through connections, but through the services that come through that pipe. Next slide, please. So, kind of working up to my close here. When we talk about advocacy, when we talk about membership and trade associations, however you invest your time and energies, always remember that you are the most important ingredient. WISPA, for our part, for our role, we can usually shape and can certainly advance an agenda. But when it comes to lawmakers, you are the constituents, so you're going to matter more. You're the one who are shaping better outcomes in your communities. You're affected by regulatory policy, and importantly, you're working in your community, you're banking in your community, you're shopping in your community, you roll trucks from your community, you're buying there. So I could go on and on. You all know that this is true. And so when we talk about economic development in communities and making communities better, making it possible for communities to shine, those who are providing resources such as broadband in these communities are vitally important, and the lawmakers know it. So don't miss an opportunity to engage with lawmakers, with policymakers to make your voice heard. And we're a part of that process, so we'd love to have you come help us amplify your voice. Next slide. To learn more about WISPA, the 501c6, there's our website. We have active committees for members that deal with our show committees for WISPA Palooza and WISPA America. We have a government affairs committee, a policy committee, a committee of state coordinators. We have a new committee for special markets and deployments that's beginning to look at what's next. And we also have an advisory committee called the Women of WISPA that Sonar plays a really important part in supporting. On WISPA Educational Institute side, that's the 501c3. There's the website, and we have committees open to anyone in best practices, education, and future solutions. And then finally, for more information on the PAC, you kind of have to be a WISPA member to do that. That's just the way the PAC rules work. But more information is there, and I'm happy to answer any question that you have on that. And then a final slide, please. Here are email addresses you might be interested in having. I'm David Zumwalt, the President and CEO of WISPA. If you want to talk policy, Louis Peretz is our VP of Policy. Industry Standards, Richard Bernhardt. Federal Advocacy is Matt Mandel, and State Advocacy is Steve Schwarbel. And I want to thank Sonar for the invitation. I want to thank you for your participation in this. Happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much, David. We appreciate it. I wanted to just take a peek and see if there were any open questions that we could answer. If not, then we're going to jump over to the next section. While we wait to see if there's any questions, I just want to thank you again for your leadership, your passion, and your powerful reminder that the last mile often starts with entrepreneurs who are deeply embedded in the communities that they serve. And your perspective on spectrum funding, the future of wireless broadband, helps ground today's conversations on the policy and operational realities that WISPs face every day. If you have any follow-up questions for David or WISP, be sure to connect with him online. I don't see any live questions right now.
I must have anticipated them all. So that's
you must have. You really must have. Well, thank you so much, David.
Thank you.